Last week, we started a new series, if you were not here, and we are calling this series simply The Journey. The idea is that living out this life as a follower of Jesus, trying to grow as a disciple, it is a process. It is something that happens over time. It is a journey. And every journey has a starting place. And so last week we argued that the starting place for this journey really should be a place of desire, of hunger, of wanting something. I think oftentimes we think that we start a journey with a plan, right? How many of you guys have ever been there where you start some type of a journey and you have this whole plan, but if you don't have a desire to do it, how quickly does that plan go out the window? You know, maybe you've gone to the doctor and the doctor says, hey, you know what? You really need to be healthier, you should be more active, and you need to eat better food. And the doctor maybe even says, hey, let's come up with a plan right now before you leave the doctor's office. And it doesn't matter how good that plan is. It doesn't matter how often your doctor sends you a message on My Chart. If you don't have a desire to make those changes, will those changes happen? No, it doesn't start with a plan, it starts with a desire. But if that's where we start, what do we do if we don't have that desire? If we just aren't there? We're like, well, I don't know. Maybe I want God in my life. Maybe I want to grow, but maybe I don't. I'm just kind of in this spot. Well, we took a little bit of the end of last week and talked about, because we are using the language that the Bible uses of hunger and thirst for God's presence. So we said, how do we grow our appetite? And we talked through what does that look like to grow your appetite for the presence of God in your life. And so it's this longing and a desire for God's presence. It's a desire for change, because if God's going to come into your life, there's going to be change. Because neither you or I are exactly where we should be. And so the more that God comes into my life, the more of me that needs to leave. And so there's change. And change is a funny thing. In some areas of life, we want change so badly. Yes, I want to change. I desperately need change. And in other areas of our life, we push back against change so much. And we're like, no, I don't want to change. I don't want this to happen, all these different things. And we fight it because change is often painful. Change is difficult. It requires things of us. But here's the thing, not changing is also painful. There are moments in your life where you are is not good, it's not healthy, and if you stay where you are, you will be in pain, whether this is physical, literal pain, or just the pain of your life and spiritual pain. So as I say that sounds really exciting, right? Like life is painful when there's change, and it's painful when there isn't change. I'm here this morning to tell you that life is pain. All right, so let's pray. We're going to go home. Just a great, uplifting message, right? No, okay. Here's the thing. Life has pain, but there's people way smarter than me, and there's a guy that I love the way he phrases this, and he says it this. He says, change happens when the pain of staying the same is greater than the pain of changing. If there's pain in both spots, and pain of changing is what stops us from changing. I don't want to experience that pain. Well, the time when we'll actually take that step is when the pain of sitting here in this spot actually grows and grows and grows and reaches the point where you're like, you know what, change actually doesn't sound that bad. You know, you think of your physical health where it's like you're staying in that spot and you don't want to kick that habit. You don't want to quit whatever it is. And you're like, no, I'm fine, until all of a sudden you're not fine. And you're like, okay, I guess we will start this journey of change. So essentially, we change when we have to. When we hit that rock bottom, when staying the way we are isn't a viable option anymore. Regardless of how you get there, the journey of walking with God often starts out of a need, out of a longing, out of a desire for something more. And my hope is that for each person here, either you have already started that journey, Or maybe you are here because you are realizing that you do need change, that you need something more, that there must be more to life, and you're looking for that. And so you're processing through that, and maybe that's why you're here this morning. And so over the next month or two, we're going to be walking through different parts of this journey of following Jesus and what it means to be a follower. And one of the most important aspects of this journey is that we don't do it alone. That's what church is. That's what community is, that we do this together. We do life together. We follow Jesus together. All right, and so even this morning, I want us just to be ready for God to challenge us, that he has something for each one of us today. All right, that we don't just walk through the doors and we sit here and jump through the hoops and then we leave. We want to come in here, we want to walk through the doors, we want to open his word, and we want to be changed by that time. And so let's do that this morning. Now, sometimes as we walk on a journey, it is fun. Sometimes not so much. It's almost always eventful. When I think of a journey, I have this like snippet in my mind that I knew I couldn't use as like our sermon graphic, but it's from a movie. And my wife is going to love this because she's a huge Lord of the Rings nerd, all right? Like multiple tattoos in Elvish, all right? And like things like that. And so, but it's not Lord of the Rings, it's The Hobbit. And so when I think of a journey, I think of towards the beginning of The Hobbit, you have Bilbo Baggins, if you haven't watched this, and he's at one moment, he's running out of the Shire, the place that he lives, and he's got his backpack on, and he's got this big, long, like, piece of paper, all right, that's giving him directions, and he's running out of there with a smile on his face, and he's saying, I'm going on an adventure. And it's funny because, like, in the movie, if Bilbo knew what was like waiting for him on that adventure, I don't think this is what he would look like, right? Like you're just like, now how many of us have been there? Like this is a little bit like even the journey as a Christian often starts with a lot of excitement, maybe a little bit of apprehension of like, oh, it's all this new stuff. I'm so excited about it. And you're like, I'm going on an adventure. And sitting next to you is a Christian who's been doing it for 10 years, and they're just like, yep, you are. And they're all excited and so like looking forward to this, and they're like, give it 10 years, give it a month, give it a week. Now, I say this not to say that it isn't this amazing adventure, because it is. But I think there's a misunderstanding by a lot of people that, well, if I'm living my life the way that God wants me to, then everything should just be working out the way that it should. Everything's going to be great. It's going to be rainbows and unicorns and sunshine, and it's great. I'm a child of God. And then all of a sudden life hits, and you're like, whoa, what is going on here? And for a lot of people, they'll have a struggle in their faith of like, am I doing something wrong? Am I not doing this right? And what's going on? And so when we make the decision to follow Jesus, we need to realize that there's a lot more that's going on here. Not everything is difficult, and just because maybe you don't enjoy it, it doesn't mean it's bad. Some of that actually is meant for growth. It may not feel like it in that moment, but God can use those seasons and situations for good. Now, it doesn't mean that God orchestrates every single bad situation in our life, but it does mean that he can use it. He can redeem it. Scripture says that God works together all things for the good of those who love him. All things. Doesn't matter if it's good, bad. He works together all things for the good of those who love him. So one of the really common ways that we see this through the storyline of the Bible is through a theme called the wilderness. And I think as I talk about the wilderness theme, you're probably going to be sitting here and you're going to be like, oh, I've had wilderness moments in my life. And there's going to be people in the room that you're going to say, you are describing my life right now. I am in the wilderness. And it's a biblical theme, and it's something that we have to have the right mindset about so that we can truly be grasping what God is doing. All right, so the wilderness is a geographical, literal area in the Bible. All right, like if you pull up even Google Maps, looking at that area of the world right now, you will see green areas along the coast, green areas following rivers, green areas around little seas, green areas in Egypt's delta, and then you'll see a lot of brown. And the brown is the wilderness. Because the wilderness is a place, it's the Hebrew word midbar, and it correlates with a few different things. The wilderness is a place where it's wild, thus the wilderness. All right, it is a hostile environment. It is uninhabitable. It is remote. It is absent of water, or at least sufficient water. Humans cannot survive in the wilderness on their own. There is a lack of resources. It has dangerous creatures. It's the opposite of abundance, the opposite of flourishing, the opposite of the garden. Moses describes the wilderness in Deuteronomy 8 as he's talking to the Israelites. Doesn't this just sound like a place you want to be? He says, do not forget that he, God, led you through the great and terrifying wilderness with its poisonous snakes and scorpions, and where it was so hot and dry. That does not sound like a place I want to go to. Does not sound like a place I want to try and make home. But the wilderness actually also has another meaning or description, and it almost seems contradictory to the first. It's a place that is dangerous, we said that, and it actually, the wilderness brings you close to death. When you're in the wilderness and you're on your own, it's going to bring you to the edge of your life. But as you are at the edge of life, it also brings you closer to God. And in that moment, you are forced to make decisions that will shape you and your character and your future. It is a place where you actually have to trust God, because you cannot survive in the wilderness on your own and by your own means. You have to depend on something more than yourself. So it's like a test. The wilderness is a place of testing and refining and purifying. And most of the biblical characters go through wilderness moments or seasons. So if you're going through a wilderness season, understand that you're in good company. Both of the creation accounts actually start off with wilderness as the setting. And God is taking wilderness and he is giving it purpose and functionality and order. He is bringing the water up out of the ground and then brings the ground up out of the water. And it's this whole thing of building this place that is no longer wilderness. The Garden of Eden is depicted as this oasis that came out of and is surrounded by wilderness. Creation itself, its default place without the intervention of God, is wilderness. But then God does a silly thing and he trusts us and he gives us the direction to cultivate, to steward, to take care of the land, to basically take wilderness and turn it into something more. And so it takes God coming and giving functionality and purpose and then continuing to sustain it for it not to be that. And so in the wilderness, you have to face the reality that you cannot do this on your own. You must rely on something more than yourself. So, okay, are we starting to understand like how the wilderness is both something that brings us close to death and also something that brings us close to God? All right, it's kind of that near-death experience. I think we're all like, oh yeah, when someone has that, often then they're like, oh wow, I need to get my life in order. But this is more. It actually brings you to interact with God. Abraham, Jacob, Moses, the Israelites, King David, Elijah, John the Baptist, Jesus, they all have wilderness moments in their stories. Paul and the author of Hebrews talk about the wilderness in their letters. And these different examples help us understand what this is. It's a desolate place, a lonely place where you are never thriving, you are just surviving. But in those moments, you find God. So a couple quick biblical examples, and then I want to bring it back to us because I think this is massive. You will, if you haven't already, experience the wilderness. And it's something that we have to understand and we have to realize and we have to have the right mindset so that we can get what we need. All right, so when we look at these moments, you have Moses, who's in Egypt, and he's royalty in Egypt. He kills an Egyptian, and what does he do? Because of his actions, he runs away into the wilderness. So his actions send him into the wilderness, and he's actually kind of on the edge of the wilderness and civilization because they have to meet somewhere, and that's where you would like graze your herd. If you were a shepherd, if you were anything like that, you would be on the edge of the wilderness. And so he's in the wilderness, literally and figuratively. He has no clue what he's doing with his life. And God meets him in the burning bush. And God gives him purpose, gives him direction, and Moses moves back into this season that is what we know of Moses. He didn't write a whole lot about his time in the wilderness. Then you have Hagar, who at no fault of her own, she actually is abused by Abraham and Sarah, and then cast into the wilderness. And while she's there, God begins to sustain her and her son Ishmael and take care of them. You have the Israelites who are brought out of Egypt and into the wilderness during the Exodus. And they don't have enough water, and God provides water. And they don't have enough food, and God provides manna. And they want meat, and God provides quail. And it doesn't matter what he does, they just complain the whole time they're in the wilderness. You have King David, who starts off by defending his flock in the wilderness from a bear and from a lion. And it's this time of refining him, creating in him the heart that he needs to have, the leadership, the everything he needs to be the king that he's going to be is happening in the wilderness. And then he has to run from Saul, and he runs into the wilderness to escape Saul. And so God sustains him in the wilderness and protects him. Then he goes back and he's a king. Then he has to go back into the wilderness again when his son Absalom tries to overthrow him. And a lot of the Psalms that David writes, like some of them will say this is a psalm of, and it'll talk about the time of David's life. Many of those ones actually will talk about this is a psalm from the wilderness. The one we read last week, our main passage, is from the wilderness. It says, my soul thirsts for you, my whole body longs for you in this parched and weary land where there is no water. And so David has taken the physical thirst and hunger that he has, and he's transferred that into, God, I need your presence. Elijah lives in the wilderness and is sustained by God via ravens that bring him bread and meat twice a day. So when the New Testament opens up and you have John the Baptist on the scene, and it says that he lives in the wilderness, this means one of two things or both of them. It means he's crazy because you can't live in the wilderness, which it kind of seems like he is a little bit. He's wearing camel fur and he's eating honey and locusts and these different things, and that's people's impression of him. Like, that guy's kind of crazy, that dude out in the wilderness, because you don't live in the wilderness. But it also means this. It means that God is sustaining him, because you can't live in the wilderness and be there on your own. And so it actually has this cool meaning as John the Baptist, it opens up and he's in the wilderness. But then it also carries some of this importance as Jesus goes into the wilderness to be baptized. And then Jesus goes into the wilderness to be tempted for 40 days. And then a really cool piece is actually that when Jesus does the miracle and feeds the 5,000, it says he's in a remote place outside of the villages. This is the edge of the wilderness. He's in the wilderness with people, and he provides food for 5,000 people. Up until this point, who is the only character that can provide for someone and sustain them in the wilderness? It's God. And so even in that moment, like, we miss some of these big theological stances that the authors of the Bible are writing when they say, listen, Jesus is providing what people need in the wilderness. And so we see this theme run through the Bible. It's in Revelation. And it's depicted as both a bad place and a good place where God can protect. And so I would say this. I would say the wilderness is a place that every person will find themselves in at some point. Most likely multiple times in your life, you will be in a wilderness. And it can be a place that you end up because of your own decisions or the actions of others, or a place you choose to retreat to, or God can even lead you there. Now, this is what we need to understand about the wilderness. The wilderness is not inherently good or bad. It's the wilderness. I would actually say, instead of being good or bad, it's necessary. It refines us, it tests us, it reveals where our ultimate trust lies. It's an opportunity to grow closer to God and rely on Him and grow in our dependence on Him. The problem is the wilderness is scary, and we love to be independent and not have to rely on anybody else. And so we often view seasons like this as negative, and we try to avoid them as much as we can. All right, so maybe so far this morning, maybe you're tracking with me, maybe you're newer, and you're like, oh man, this is a whole lot. All right, I want to bring this back to us, because what does it look like to be in the wilderness? If this is something that's going to happen in our life, what does that look like? Well, oftentimes the wilderness is where we find ourselves in the seasons of big change. Maybe you lose your job. Maybe you change jobs. Maybe you move from one place to another. Maybe there's some big shift that happens and you find yourself in a place where you don't really know what's going on and you feel like you're not able to provide for yourself anymore. And maybe that's actually real. You're having to depend on God to financially provide for you because you don't have the income that you once had. Maybe relationally, you're in the wilderness. Maybe in your marriage. Maybe you're following Jesus and your spouse isn't, or at least not in the same way, and you don't really know what to do with that. And you're having to sit in this place of trusting God. And it's bringing you to a place where you're like, this wasn't my plan. This isn't what I wanted. I can't do this on my own. I feel like this place that I'm in is dangerous. And you find yourself in the wilderness. I would say that right now, in a way, our church, or at least church leadership and myself, like I find us in the wilderness. As we make this, we've made the announcement that Pastor Aaron's going to, be sent out as kind of a home missionary and going to the St. Cloud area and working with colleges, and we are beyond excited about that. But it's left us in this place where we're like, what do we do? I am someone who really likes to have a plan. And then I like working that plan. And I'll tell you this. God often likes to take my plans and just rip them out of my hands. And you would think that I would have learned my lesson by now. But I just I love to have a plan. But here's the thing, when you have a plan, I've heard it said this way, like God doesn't want to give you a map, that shows the whole thing and the destination, because then do you need anybody else? Well, it depends on how good you are at reading maps and things like that. But instead, it's a compass where every step you're just still having to rely on Him. And it's like, am I still going in the right direction? I don't really know where the destination fully is. I don't know how to get there. But I have something guiding me, and I have to continually check in and make sure I'm not off course. That's very different from having a map in your hands. I like a map. God likes me to have a compass. And I found that to be true for many of us. Now, the beautiful thing about the wilderness is when God provides His provision. Think of the quail, the water, the manna, the ravens. It was all day by day, and you had to depend on God. You couldn't just be ready like the next day. You're like, okay, yep, we still got manna left over from yesterday because it would spoil. And so understand, you cannot stockpile God's provision in your life. Because then it just becomes independence and we don't need Him anymore. If God is providing for you, it's going to be in the day to day to day to day. And we don't like that, but it's what it is. And it's what life in the wilderness is. Maybe spiritually you feel like you're in the wilderness. You had a season where you started off like Bilbo and you're like, I'm going on an adventure. And all of a sudden your adventure has brought you to the wilderness and you're not so happy anymore. understand that in those moments, this is intentional, and it draws us closer to God if we allow it to, if we trust him. I think there's so many different ways the wilderness can show up in our life. But we will have these moments. I know of at least a dozen people, a dozen families in our church right now that they didn't necessarily have this language, but even in the last week, they'd be like, this is going on, and I'm sitting there like preparing this message, and I'm like, man, you're in the wilderness. And I think I said that to a few people, and they just kind of look at me like, what? I'm like, come on Sunday. It'll make more sense. There's a lot of us that are in this spot. And the wilderness often feels lonely. But understand this, it's one of the most universal experiences of following God. And so it doesn't need to be lonely. Because the person next to you, they either have been, they are, or they will be in the wilderness. And that's what's beautiful about community. And so we need to try and not avoid this, but move in this direction. And so maybe last week you were wondering, how do I grow in my hunger, in my thirst? How do I grow in my desire and my longing for more of God in my life? Let me tell you this. If you want to grow in your thirst, wander into the wilderness. There's no water. You're going to get thirsty. And now for some of us, you want to grow in your hunger and your thirst for God. Begin to move into a place where you need to be dependent on him. Walk away from your comfort zone. The life of every way that you're living right now where you're just like, oh yeah, but this is nice, this is easy, I feel like God's been moving me to go and do this, but we get so comfortable in our cultivated land that we don't want to go into the wilderness. And God's like, if you would just trust me and you would come, you wouldn't believe what I can do in your life. You wouldn't believe the Eden that I can create out of this wilderness for you. And so here's what I'm going to do. I have three. And I'm going to rattle through these quick. Three little quick ways that I think this matters for us. Couple takeaways. First one is this. You can find yourself in the wilderness for all sorts of reasons and at different seasons. And you will. Don't immediately think it's punishment. Don't think it's because you automatically made a bad decision. Don't automatically blame somebody else. There's lots of reasons why you're there. The reason why you're there doesn't matter nearly as much as what's going to happen. So expect it, don't fight it, don't avoid it. It's not a punishment. Embrace it. Second thing is this. If you spend your time in the wilderness complaining, you will probably be there a while. All right, the Israelites. You want to know how long, the Bible tells us, how long the journey from Sinai to the Promised Land is supposed to take? 11 days. Can you imagine an 11-day journey that took 40 years? I mean, that's just brutal. Actually, they stopped at Sinai for a while. It actually took them 6 months to go from Egypt to the Promised Land. They were kicked back in basically as punishment for 40 years. And they just wandered in the wilderness. Don't wander in the wilderness. All right? And that kind of brings us to this last point. Use your time in the wilderness to grow and come out the other side ready for what God has. If you wander in the wilderness, you're going to come out the other side and you're going to find yourself in more wilderness. Don't be like the Israelites, be like Jesus. When he came out of the 40 days in the wilderness, he went into his ministry because he had prepared and he was ready and he allowed God to speak to him and work through him. And he just accepted what the wilderness was. It was a period of growth. All right, let's stand together. We're bringing this to a close. As we went into this series on discipleship and spiritual growth and all these things, I just felt it is so crucial and so important that right away at the beginning, we begin to understand the idea that this will happen in your life. It will. You cannot be a good enough Christian to not have the wilderness. Because in fact, the wilderness is part of you becoming a better Christian. It's part of you growing. It's part of this process. It's part of the journey. And so it's not something to run away from. It's not something to avoid. It's not something to get mad about. It's not something to complain about. It's something to embrace and to say, God, how can I trust you in this season so that I can grow? And so I felt the need to talk about this because it's not very fun to hear this while you're in it. I mean, maybe you're in it today and you're like, oh, no, this is good. It's giving me perspective. But for the most part, it's much better to have this understanding so that when we get to this spot in our life, we actually are almost welcoming it with open arms. The wilderness. I need more time with God. I need to grow closer. I need to be pulled out of my comfort zone. And so that's how we want to approach this. As we go into the rest of this series and talking about growing and spiritual growth, like, understand this will be part of your life. Embrace it. Look to others around you as well. They can help you walk through this a little bit. Don't rely on them. That needs to be reserved simply for Jesus. But they can walk with you. And so lean on community. Press into Jesus. And be ready for what it is that he has for you. I want to close this in prayer. God, I pray that as we go throughout our week, God, we may have even just moments that we would classify as wilderness. Maybe there's just a short little stint in our day that we have to process through. God, what is it that you're trying to do? What is it that you're trying to teach me in this moment? How can I grow closer to you? God, maybe we're in here and we've been in the wilderness for longer than we can remember. And we don't even know what to do anymore. We feel like we're wandering and wandering and wandering. And God, we need you. We need you at the center of this. We want to follow you. Lord, the way that you led the Israelites in the wilderness with this cloud by day and this pillar of fire by night, and as they'd sit there and they'd say, Lord, we don't want to go if your presence doesn't go. And if your presence moves, we want to follow. God, I pray that that would be the prayer of our life. Lord, that we would just follow you. That if you're having us wait and sit in the wilderness right now, that we aren't trying to desperately on our own get out of it, but God, that we would just sit in your presence. We'd wait. We would grow. So Jesus, we ask this for every single one of us. It's a bold prayer, but Jesus, bring more wilderness into our life. We ask this in your name. Amen.